Thank you, Grace, for your time and for coming and talking to me. I'm really thankful for that.
Oh, thank you for your interest and for reading my book.
Yes. We'll start out with you telling us a little bit about yourself, although I've read your book and I know a lot, but maybe to the viewers who haven't, where are you from originally, and what was your childhood like?
Sure. So I was born in the Philippines, and I came to this country when I was to the United States when I was 2 years old. And I've grown up mostly in a small New England town that was, at the time that I was living there was not many immigrant families or even families of color. And so my family stood out a lot in that town. And then I went to college close in another like small private New England college, and then went to grad school out west where I met all kinds of Filipinos. The Filipino American community out in California was a lot older than the community that I was in Boston. Um, and uh, and then after graduate school in California, I moved to Oregon for a couple of years, and then I came back and have lived outside of Boston um, for the past, I don't know how many years, like probably 20 years at this point.
Hmm. In one of your essays in the book, there's a chapter called "The Gentle Tacity,"
Mm-hmm.
and you were in fourth grade, right?
Yes.
And the teacher said that today or the next day you're going to talk about Philippines, and you said, "Oh, my parents are from there," but you didn't say you were from there. So you thought of yourself as American then, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't even know when I understood that I wasn't born in the US. I'm not sure, but I did think of my parents as being from there and me as being American, like all my friends. I mean, there are ways that I didn't even understand myself racially or ethnically. Like I just thought like, oh, I'm like my friends, which eventually meant like, oh, I'm white. And then there would be times when I would be shocked that I wasn't, because I was doing all the things that they were doing. I felt pretty accepted. I mean, there were times when I felt my quote unquote like Orientalness being called out, but generally I just felt like anyone else, which meant that I adopted this identity inside of myself that I just like was a white American girl on some level. And so yeah, so no, I thought of them as being from over there and me from being from here. And some of it was accents. Some of it was the kinds of foods that, I mean, I ate Filipino food, of course, that's what my parents had at home, but I was always pushing for American foods.
Mm.
And when I was growing up, there was like a big marketing campaign for like processed food and like convenience foods like Hamburger Helper, Tuna Helper, all these kinds of things to help the American housewife cut time from cooking. And I liked those foods at the time.
Mhm. Talking of food, there's another chapter in your book where you go with your father on a road trip in your green station wagon, and
Yes.
you stop by the side of the road to eat, and your parents would pack traditional food, home cooked food, and you were eating on the glove box, sitting on the glove box or somewhere in the car, and you saw the people eating peanut butter jelly sandwich, and you were embarrassed. So, did when was the time in your life and you said, like, this is who I am and I'm going to eat this, I'm not going to worry about who is thinking what about this? Did
I mean,
that change?
unfortunately, it probably wasn't until, I don't know, maybe even after college
Oh,
that
wow.
I felt a sense of pride about Filipino food. I mean, I, and some of it was from cooking my own food. Like, I moved out after college and I had my own apartment. And I think that's when I started to experiment with making my mother's recipes. I know that I would call her and ask her to talk me through making chicken adobo, for example, and other foods. And then I would serve them to my friends, and people would be really excited about them. And I think that's really when I started to build a sense of pride around making and eating Filipino food, and learning more about it and understanding the different food ways and why things are the way they are. Um, and I'm part of a Filipino American book club,
Mm.
I've been part of it, I think, almost for 20 years.
Mm.
And one of the things that we do, we're all Filipino American. One of the things that we do is we learn how to make Filipino dishes. And when we're in person, we bring them as potluck. And so all of us are experimenting with making Filipino food and serving it to each other. And so that's also been a sense of discovery and curiosity and like experimentation and trying to make things taste good.
Very nice. So all these thoughts in your mind, like, when can you be comfortable with your roots, and when can you be Filipino without being embarrassed about it? Did those feelings, those thoughts, compel you to become a writer in some way?
Um,
Your immigrantness.
yeah, I mean, I think that the experience of feeling on the outside of things and being an observer and watcher of human behavior, I think all of that is really good for all kinds of reasons, but like especially for a writer, I think that's part of whether someone's an immigrant or not, or a person of color, or working class, or in some way feeling on the outside of the community that they're involved with. I think this outsiderness is a way that, at least for me, was important for me in becoming a writer, because I was always observing and watching people and paying attention and being curious. Like, I wonder what that person's story is. Like, look at how they're holding themselves. Look at what they're reading. Look at what's happening. And it was just a way of like keeping myself interested and not bored. I mean, I grew up before the internet and I didn't have like something in my pocket all the time to entertain me. So I was just watching people constantly. But I was also watching them to find out, like, what does it mean to behave in a culturally appropriate way in this particular context? And that's different in all kinds of contexts. Like when I used to play soccer, I played soccer from like first grade to say 10th grade. And that was its own, like being part of an athletic team was its own sort of cultural um, shift for me to understand the norms there, for example. And so I've always been curious about that and a watcher of it.
So before you wrote the book, you were still writing, but in your head.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was doing a lot of preparation for what
Right.
would be good for a writer to
Right,
do.
right. So you talking about you being a Filipino in America, although you speak like an American, and you are, I mean, the only place you really lived is America. But you did go to Philippines for a residency fellowship, writing fellowship, and also in between other times too. Did you say in your book somewhere that you never felt more American in your life before?
Yeah.
So what was that like? You also mentioned about crossing streets and it was hard and difficult, and but also culturally how close you stand to people. Because I've made that mistake back and forth here and there. I've stood too close to line in line to people, and
Isn't
this,
it fascinating though, these
yeah.
really small ways that we don't even, I mean, I've never talked about it. Like they're like unspoken ways that we are in the world and no one's telling us what the rules are. Like in this country, you should stand this far away. And in another country, that means that you're infringing on someone's personal space.
True, right,
Teaches us this, and
right.
yet we pick it up and we discover what that is. And so, being an immigrant or some other person that is not used to these things, we're doing a lot of work all the time, right, to pay attention. And so I didn't like people I knew people, Filipino Americans, immigrants, who would go back and forth to the Philippines every summer, even during Christmas. But that wasn't the case for my family. I didn't go back until I was sometime in college. Maybe I was already 19 or 20 years old. So I hadn't been back in almost 2 decades. But I had thought of the Philippines as this place that I would feel accepted and at home. And I built it up in my mind as like a kind of a homecoming. And it wasn't that way. Like I just thought like, oh, I don't understand things at all. Like I'm not, there was ways I was treated as like an expert on the Philippines because I'd be the only Filipino in a room. And once I got to the Philippines, I realized like, I don't know anything. I have so much to learn. And so, yeah, I didn't go back to the Philippines that often. Maybe like every several years or so, I would go back for some reason. But I did get to spend an extended period of time, 6 months, during my Fulbright to the
Mhm.
Philippines in 2015. And that was really wonderful. Of course, there's so much more to learn, and I could spend more time there. But that was the first time I got to live there and not have this deadline of like, oh, we're leaving in 10 days, try to
Right.
pack everything in. And it was really a great
Mhm.
experience. But
Mhm.
I make it really cemented in my mind that like whatever it means to be an American, I
Mhm.
do feel like I'm that and not Filipino.
Mm. Did some point after first month or second month or towards the end of your trip there, did you feel like, um, I can live here and everyone looks like me, I am American, I've lived in America, but maybe I can get used to this kind of life, and at least people, I mean, I don't have to be conscious of my Filipino-ness, I can just be here. Did it ever feel like, or you were waiting, I can't wait to get back to America?
I mean, there's lots of like,
Okay.
for me, like home is where people are,
Right.
the people that I want to be around. And so I missed people back here in
Mhm.
the States. But my husband and I would talk about like the kind of life that we could live in Manila, which was at a much more comfortable, stable place than we were living in the United States. I mean, we could basically live like wealthy people in the
Right.
Philippines. And so we fantasized about it and talked about it, um, and there's just so many things that are wonderful about being there. Um, but things changed pretty quickly after we left. Once there was a new president, um, I didn't go back during that presidency. It just felt too dangerous. And so that kind of, so that sort of put us off of it for a while, is this
Right.
idea that there could be that much instability so quickly.
Your last name is Talusan. Am I saying it right?
Yes, Talusan.
Talusan. So, and also, it's, I mean, I've read and watched about Talusan last name, and it seems to be pretty well-known name in Philippines. Is that right?
It's
Last
a,
name?
I
Yeah.
mean, if there's a Talusan, I'm probably related to them.
Oh, wow.
It's not like a clan. Yeah, I mean, I think so.
Yeah.
I don't know that much about the name. I know that there's a place in the south of the Philippines. There's a town called Talusan,
Mm.
which I've wanted to visit, but I think would be a very difficult thing to do. We're not from there. I don't know what the
Right.
connection is like, but that's we're from Bulacan, and so if there are Talusans from Bulacan, likely I'm related to them somehow.
Okay. Is there something, it's like, my last name is Singh, and the people in the north of India, they are very proud of their last name Singh, so Singh, Shishati, warrior class or whatever. But like, if Talusan is your father's name, and you wrote about him in the My Father's News, right?
Yes.
Uh, and um, and you also say somewhere that he was actually in a book reading sitting somewhere, and he couldn't believe how much compassion people showed towards him when you were
Yes.
reading about. But when you were writing about it, did you worry that my father could be hurt by this?
Well, so the whole reason I even wrote it is because he gave it to me as a story.
Mm.
I think there's push pull in all of us. There is a part of us that wants to be known and wants to tell our stories. And then maybe there's another part of us that thinks, oh no, what would that mean? And, to do it. And I feel that way. I mean, there's things that I have to kind of forget that anyone exists when I'm writing, or else I'd just be too scared all the time.
Right.
Um, but for that particular piece, I mean, my father knows I'm a writer. He actually feeds me stories all the time. He pitches
Mm.
me all the time, to the point where there was a time in my early 20s where I would get sort of annoyed with him, like, Dad, like, you
Mm.
don't understand how book publishing works. You don't understand how magazines work. Like,
Right.
your story is like, no, which was really, limited thinking on my part, because the stories that I've some of my favorite pieces that I've written have come from him and his ideas and the things that he's wanted me to write about. So I wouldn't have access to that story unless he gave it to me. And so I felt comfortable writing about it. But when it was about to be published, I did feel a little bit scared. And I wrote back to him and told him, as well as my siblings, like, this is about to get published. Can you just read it? Like, I just needed to know that the consequence for me publishing it wouldn't be devastating. I wasn't going to stop the publication of it, but I needed to give them a heads up. And so when it came time for my book to be published, I tried to do the same thing. And I said, oh, would anyone want to read my book in manuscript before it's published? So that, and it was mostly for me because I didn't want to feel nervous, like, oh, they're going to be mad at me when it's published. But all of them said, no, like, we trust you. Like, we know who you are as a writer and we trust you. So we don't need to read it. We'll read it when everyone else reads it when it's published.
You also said that you write to know about you, right? Writing eliminates writing as thinking. So if you don't write, you would not, like, sometimes you write about your dad to know more about him, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I was doing. I was trying to know more by writing. If I just thought about it and let that thought escape, I would never get to know the way I did when I wrote about it. So do you continue to do that? Like, when you think about something and it's like, I would like to figure it out more, and so you start writing another book? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I've transformed the way that I write in the past few years, as well as transformed the way I teach writing. And it is very much process oriented. And the idea is that we're going to practice a lot, and we're only going to show and publish like a little bit of it. And really the point of that writing practice is to explore, express, find out, discover. As a practice, I find it to be incredibly helpful and illuminating as a way to find out. And the analogy I use with my students is like, maybe something like crazy happened to you the night before you went out to this party, or you went out with friends and like something happened, and you write the next morning, you're like texting or messaging a friend about it. And through that process of describing what happened, sometimes things become clearer to us as we describe it. And I've had that experience myself. And so I use writing as a way to find out. I mean, I did it this morning. Like, I was following, one of my editors called it like gathering string or following a thread. I mean, there's these like metaphors to other craft forms. And so I was following this thread of this thought I had, which was when I had my reconstruction after my bilateral mastectomy, I remembered that the plastic surgeon used cadaver tissue as part of that process. And so I just did some research on it, and I was writing about it. I don't know why I was interested in it all of a sudden this week, but it didn't matter. I wanted to find out more. And it was through the writing that I kind of found out like why I was interested in it and what I was leading towards. And that process, no matter what I'm writing about, that's like an interesting process. It engages me in all kinds of ways. And I look forward to it, actually. Like, what am I going to find out tomorrow when I write? So beautiful. I enjoy it.
This is beautiful. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I should also tell that to my students. And also one of my professor Harjin said, like, somebody asked him, like, where do you belong? Do you belong in China, or in America, or he said in one line, I live on the page.
Oh my gosh. That is incredible. Right? Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And that seems, I can imagine him saying that too. Right. That's really beautiful.
Well, thank you so much, Grace, for your time. And I enjoyed talking with you. And thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you. Really appreciate it. And thanks for your whole project. I think it's really important. And at this time, I mean, anytime, but this time in particular, hearing the voices of immigrants is really important. And it goes against these other narratives, dominant narratives that tell us lies about them.
Thank you so much.